तो पहले we'll complete with our environment, verify that's a short chapter, and then our environment, no, nothing much to write. Our environment is just basic understanding. This side volume है, volume 2. यहाँ पे है. That side, do you have volume? Volume 2 है. इधर आओ. Extra उसका क्या विजय? इस तरफ है. नहीं है. Very good. Next है. Volume 2 है. इधर आओ ना. That side volume 2 है. Last volume 2 है. Last line में. Textbook नहीं. Volume 2 I'm saying. दो बुक चाहिए ना. Please get up from all three of you. Please spread out. Come on. Come on. They will not bring the book. इसका बुक है, वो बुक लेगा, बाकी निकलो वहाँ से. Come on, get up from there. Every day इनको separate करना पड़ता है. आप उधर का चला. चल गुफरान आ गया. इधर आप फर्स्ट बेंच पे. Come on, get up. Gufran, you go and sit. You go and sit with him. Go and sit with him. You have the book. अच्छा. एक बुक यहाँ पे शेयर करो. एक एक्स्ट्रा बुक होगा तो. हाँ. ठीक. तू लोग क्या मेहरबानी करते हैं क्या आके? एक कुछ भी मत लिखना. बेटा वापस करना ये बुक. चलो बैठो. कम प्लीज कम इधर आप. मैडम इसको आगे बिठाओ. हाँ इधर जा. बुक है. इधर आ. ओह मैं काम करो, उसको बैठा लो आगे. तो उसके पास बुक है. अच्छा दोनों एक साथ. इस बैच में पता है सिलेबस सबसे स्लो जा रहा है. वाशी 10 CBSE बैच सबसे स्लो सिलेबस जा रहा है. 2 बुक्स है ना, वहाँ पे 2 है ना. तुम्हारे पास भी बुक है. एक ही है. किसके पास नहीं है अभी और बुक? वहाँ पे एक है. यहाँ पे भी एक है. यहाँ पे एक. यहाँ पे नहीं. इसके पास है. You go there. Go and sit with him. Go. इतना खुश हो रहा है. बात किया ना देखना. इधर आओ. Now, we'll start with these are basic concepts to understand. Those of you don't have your own book, take out your notebook and you'll have to write down some important terms, definition that you'll have to go through. The main important part of the chapter that you should know. We are talking about the concept of our environment and what are some of the important concepts to understand. The entire chapter is majorly about the ecosystem and the factors components. Now we start with number 1. What is meant by ecosystem? What is ecosystem? Ecosystem is a self-sustained. How do you define? Ecosystem is a self-sustained environment. Ecosystem is a self-sustained environment where the plants and the animals. See there's a definition also. Ecosystem. An ecosystem is a relatively self-contained and distinct community of organisms, plants and animals. Tick karo. That's the definition you will learn and write. What is ecosystem? Now, basic to understand ecosystem kya hai? It is a self-sustained environment. एक self-sustained distinct community hai. Then what is the meaning? Self-sustained matlab more or less satisfying. Why satisfying? Because there are biotic components like the plants and the animals also, microbes also, and abiotic components like the temperature, humidity, soil, rocks, etc. All. So the abiotic and the biotic components are constantly interacting with each other, and that's the reason we say it is a self-satisfactory or a self-sustained community. Okay, so take the definition. Types. What are the types of ecosystem? Ecosystem can be natural. Ecosystem can be artificial. So artificial ecosystems are natural ecosystems. If I talk about the desert, I talk about the ocean. In a desert, what are the biotic components? Biotic components would be the orchids, biotic components would be the scorpion, would be the snake. ये हो गया biotic components. What are the biotic components? The temperature, the sunlight, the rocks and the sand and etc. So the biotic and the biotic, they are interdependent, and that's how they are surviving there. I talk about the ocean. What are the biotic components there? The variety of small fishes, the sharks, and the different type of, we talk about the shrimps and the other different sea animals. What are the abiotic components there? The water, the minerals and the ions. So now that we are talking about the temperature and the sunlight and the humidity and etc., the pressure, all these will be considered as the abiotic components. So we are saying that the abiotic and the biotic are constantly interacting. So that's the reason the organisms are surviving there. So you have to basically understand here that what is the difference between natural and artificial. So when I talk about natural ecosystem, what is the meaning of that? Natural meaning there is no human manipulation. It's very simple to understand. And the moment we talk about artificial, then what are you supposed to understand? Artificial would be where human manipulation is there. What is the meaning of human manipulation? I talk about a farmland. An agricultural land. An agricultural land will be an example of artificial or natural. Agricultural land hai. Is that naturally growing? No, full of human manipulation. An aquarium, artificial or natural? Artificial. I talk about the forest, natural hai. I talk about the desert, natural hai. So that way simply you should be able to differentiate. Components are, what are the components of ecosystem? Components of the ecosystem to underline those words, the abiotic and the biotic. So if I have to talk about what are the components of the ecosystem, components of the ecosystem, majorly we understand there are two types of components. What are the components? One is abiotic. You now very well know what is the meaning of abiotic. Abiotic always means non-living. Sunlight, temperature, humidity, moisture, soil, rocks, minerals, all this will come under this category, abiotic. And now we talk about the concept of biotic. So what are biotic components? Biotic components means living components. The microbes and the fungus and the bacteria and the living algae in the water. Or I talk about the plants, any type of plants, or I talk about any type of animal, small, big. Every type of an organism which is able to move and reproduce on its own. That is a biotic component. So now we talk about the biotic component. This biotic component again can be categorized under two main heads. What are the two main heads? Biotic components again can be producers and can be producers and consumers. Two category to understand. Producers and consumers. What is the meaning of the word producer? Producer means an organism which can produce organic food. Organism which can produce organic food. Now that I talk about the organism which is capable of producing organic food, what is very much necessary? This particular organism should be able to manufacture its own food. So what is the mode of nutrition that it should show? Autotroph. What should be some of the special features that this organism should have? Chlorophyll, capable of converting the carbon dioxide and oxygen, carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen. Yes. So, ye capacity this organism should have. So, what can be some examples of producers then? Various different type of plants or the algae in the water. So, these are all producers. Blue-green algae. Now that we talk about the consumers, so what word should we use for the consumers? These are heterotrophs. So this is the common question very often you get the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs. There's nothing to discuss here, I think, in the 10th standard. What is the difference between autotrophs and heterotrophs? What are you supposed to write down? Write that question. I'm not going to give you the answer here. You should know what to write. What are some of the important questions only I will give you? Differentiate between autotrophs and heterotrophs. You find out the answers for yourself. If not very much convinced, then in the doubt solving you will ask. Differentiate between autotrophs and heterotrophs. These are certain questions that you are asked. Differentiate between autotrophs and heterotrophs. Differentiate between autotrophs. दो point. Those are the name. What type of feature? Chlorophyll present है, not present है. And what type of substance ने? Examples are never different. Example कभी भी difference नहीं consider किया जाता है. That is just an accessory in the answer. अगर पूछा है विद एग्जाम्पल तभी जाके मार्क मिलेगा. राइट वन डिफरेंस बिटवीन ऑटोट्रॉफ एंड हेटेरोट्रॉफ. गुफरान, तुमको कौन सा खजाना मिल गया वहां पे? Then you think I'm mad enough here to speed up because I don't want to devote any time for this chapter. Because there's one more important chapter that we have to finish. And वो already ICU में है, तुमको पता है ना? कौन? तू? क्यों? हाँ, एकदम serious अभी. What I told you last class. At the moment I enter, you all should be asking me questions. No, किसी के पास कोई doubt नहीं है. किसी के पास कोई doubt नहीं है. मन तो करता है तुम लोगों ने कहीं पे अगर possible है तुम लोगों का इंटरनेट रोक दो या कुछ तो कर दो. Nobody is studying seriously. Doubt है कोई? देखो. Possible है 10th standard बच्चे के पास कोई doubt नहीं है in that subject. मैं इतना अच्छा नहीं पढ़ाती, ये मैं भी कन्विंस्ड हूँ. कोई डाउट नहीं है? Which are the chapters you are done? Tell me. हाँ, all done. कोई confusion नहीं है? हाँ. और सब खत्म हो गया? Seriously करो, please. बड़ा हंस रहे हो तुमको डाउट नहीं है कोई? And all my other branches I have made it a point, डाउट पूछो तो ही मैं आगे का टॉपिक पढ़ाऊं. सिलेबस खत्म करके क्या करना क्या है? Every class now जो भी 3 classes बचा है, you all will ask me questions. The child who will not ask me question, नहीं, जाओ मीना मैम के साथ जाके बैठो आप. पढ़ते जा रहे हो, सिलेबस खत्म ही होता जा रहा है, सब खत्म हो गया, but you all are not studying. पढ़ोगे तो जरूर 4 डाउट आएगा. वाग्मय शुरुआत हुई कि नहीं हुई अभी तक? कौन सा चैप्टर? Which chapter you are thorough? Tell me, I'll ask you questions. कौन सा चैप्टर thorough? See, 10th standard and seriousness देखो. हाँ? Hand it out. 10th standard, you all should be that serious the moment the teachers enter, क्योंकि अभी 2-3 हफ्ते खत्म. All done. कुछ तो डाउट होना ही चाहिए, कुछ तो कंफ्यूजन होगा. If you have gone through the questions, if you have gone through the topics. हो गया? सारे सब समझ में आ गए? चलो अभी मैं हर दिन जो भी लास्ट 3 दिन बचा है, I want to ask 10 minutes questions. हाँ, आस्था? हाँ, please. जो भी डाउट्स है, कंफ्यूजन होना ही चाहिए, and that is very obvious. When will you all come with so much of doubts? आओगे when? जब फर्स्ट प्री बोर्ड्स में 50s 55 स्कोर करोगे तब. जब फर्स्ट प्री बोर्ड में ऐसा मार्क आएगा, and I hope for most of you that should not happen. But we don't have global office politics. नहीं, वो evolution है. That's not it. If you had a 50%. Marks बोल रही हूँ, not percent. And then the entire book, मैम ये चैप्टर समझ में नहीं आया. बोल के देखो ऐसा. Please read. Every time I spend 5 minutes in telling you it's high time you all should have started studying. And if you all have started studying, definitely in every particular topic, if not in every particular topic, एक particular chapter में 4 questions होना ही चाहिए. ये कैसे और ये क्यों ऐसा? Nothing. Please go through. Now we are talking about what? Consumer. What is that word that goes with consumers? Consumers are heterotrophs. What is the meaning of heterotroph? They are not capable of making their own food. Now, these heterotrophs that we are talking about, the consumers that we are talking about, consumers can be of different categories. Consumers are of different categories. Now, when we are talking about the consumers or the heterotrophs, we would say that these consumers again can be of different levels based on what type of food they eat. Consumers are all dependent on other plants or other animals. That is true because they are heterotrophs. But depending on what type of food they eat, what type of organisms they are dependent on, they would be of certain categories. What are we going to write? Say suppose I talk about the first one, primary consumers. What are primary consumers also known as? These are known as herbivores. Primary consumers also known as herbivores. Then I talk about the secondary consumers. What are the secondary consumers known as? These are carnivores, small carnivores. So when we are talking about herbivores, these are also carnivores, but I would specify these are small carnivores. Then third is I talk about the tertiary consumers. Now in case of tertiary consumers, what do we write? These are big carnivores. And then next is the top consumers. Top consumers would be scavengers. Or when we are talking about this particular group of organisms, when we are talking about the relation is something like this in a hierarchy. So we are talking about the herbivores, we are talking about the small carnivores, then the big, large carnivores, and then the scavengers. So in this particular sequence, the relationship of organism goes there. Now you will look into the next page, 167 and 68 is all about this. Read certain important points there under consumers. Point number 3. Point number 3, whenever we are talking about consumers, what are some characteristics of consumers? They are not capable of preparing their own food, and they consume food, but they are dependent on other animals and plants, and they take in food in the form of what? Carbohydrate, proteins, fats, and they will digest them into smaller, simpler forms. So tick point number 3, you'll have to read that properly. Point number 3, point number 4, under consumers, page 167. Go to the next page. The same thing that I had talked about here, 168. The first order, the second order, the third order, also known as primary, secondary, tertiary, and top consumers. Now, one particular category of consumers, now that I talk about that, what are the other group of organisms that can be considered as consumers? Decomposers also are consumers. But this concept of decomposers may not fit in every relationship. This is a typical relationship that we are going to come across. That is known as the food chain. But har ek food chain mein a typical decomposer may not fit in. Decomposers, though they are consumers, they are generally meant for the conversion of the complex part of the plant animal into the simpler forms. And decomposers are very much a part of the food chain, but not in every sequence we can fit them. See there, here we talk about some type of organism, that is omnivores, parasites, decomposers. Tick those 3 words. What are omnivores? Examples you should know. Just now we had been talking about 2 words, herbivores, carnivores. The basic difference you already know. What is the difference? Herbivores and carnivores? Herbivores and carnivores का basic difference क्या है? Plant eating forms and flesh eating forms. So we talk about the herbivores मतलब plant eating forms, and carnivores मतलब flesh eating forms. Omnivores मतलब both flesh and plant eating forms. And examples you should know. Parasites. When we are talking about the concept of parasites, what are the basic characteristics of parasites? Number 1, a parasite does not have the capacity of digesting complex food into simpler forms. A parasite, whatever example you speak about, whichever example you talk about, parasite. I talk about the flatworms. I talk about the roundworms. I talk about the leech. I talk about the mosquito. Any type of an example you talk about, the ticks and the fleas and the lice, etc. Any example you talk about, the moment it is a parasite, it will never have the capacity of taking in food and digesting. So it is depending on other organisms' body, and directly from the body fluid, that is the blood, it is absorbing the digested nutrients. क्योंकि हमारे blood में all digested nutrients in the form of simple molecules रहता है. So I talk about a parasite. What is the job? Parasite, either from the outer surface of the body or entering inside, it is taking in simpler form of nutrients from the blood. I talk about the tapeworm, roundworm, enters the body and consumes the simpler form of nutrition. I talk about the leech, and these type of organisms, the lice and the ticks, they always remain on the outer surface of the body, stuck and take the soluble nutrients. So then, what are the two type of organisms in the concept of parasitism? One is a parasite and the other is a host. And which type of organism is always benefited? The parasite is benefited, the host is always harmed. And what are the two types of parasite? Just now I talk about the leech, which always grabs nourishment by remaining attached to the outer surface. Ectoparasites. So what type of organisms are the fleas and the ticks and the mites? Ectoparasites. And what about the tapeworm and the roundworm? These are all endoparasites. Ecto means on the surface of the body of the host. Endo means inside the body of the host. Decomposers. What is the job of the decomposer? The job of the decomposer is to bring down the complex organic matter of the dead plant and animal into simpler forms. I talk about the dead pigeon on the ground, on the land. But after 2 months, I don't get to see them. Or just after 1 month, I don't get to see that pigeon. But I get to see a black patch there. What has happened in this 1 month? Bacterial decomposition has happened. As a result of decomposition, the body parts of that animal got broken down. The complex compounds, carbohydrate, proteins, fats, etc., all the complex compounds got broken down into simpler forms over a period of time because of the enzymes produced by the bacterial cells, and that's why it's a slow process. Millions of bacteria growing there, bringing about the process of decomposition and mixing the nutrients with the soil, making the soil fertile. So what is decomposition? What is it? Which type of organisms carry out decomposition and how is it beneficial for the land, for the soil? When we are talking about the process of decomposition that is happening on the land, I talk about a farmland, agricultural land. Usme the plant parts are falling and getting decomposed and getting mixed with the soil. The animal parts dying off and they are getting decomposed and mixing up with the soil. Is it happening? Is something good happening for the soil? Yes. So what type of organisms are involved in this process? The microbes, like the bacteria, majorly the bacteria involved in decomposition. What is the benefit that is happening for that land after the process of decomposition of the fallen fruit, leaves and the dead parts of the plants? Number one, the soil is becoming rich in nutrients. Number two, the soil is becoming porous. Number three, aerated. The soil is becoming porous, so more of oxygen can trap in. More of oxygen trap hoga, then the third point is more of microbes in the soil will develop, grow. Number four, more of pores means more water holding capacity. The soil will be even more productive. The soil will be even more productive. Take those points. Importance of decomposers. All these are important things. Importance of decomposers. You get questions on decomposers, their significance, etc. for 2 marks. 2 to 3 marks and some examples. See, the bacteria, fungi. Fungi basically grow whenever there is decomposition taking place. Look at that question. What will happen if the decomposers are not there in the environment? What do you think? What will happen? You have dumped all the vegetable peel and etc. Believing that these are all biodegradable. Ye to biodegradable hai. But the soil is absolutely, we have cleaned the soil of microbes. Usko microbe free kar diya. And then in that patch of land, we are depositing all the farm waste, peel of the vegetables, waste food, etc. Is this substances, are these substances now getting decomposed? No, because microbes nahi hai. So what will happen now? Though the substances are all biodegradable, they will now create foul smell. The process of decomposition is happening very slow. And this will in turn result in pollution of the land and the water body nearby and the air also. This will cause, from this chapter you get case studies majorly or assertion questions you will get. And this will again result in spread of various different type of diseases. So if microbes are there in the soil enough, then the process of decomposition is fast. The nutrients are returned back to the soil in a couple of months. The soil is becoming fertile, helping in the growth of the plants. But if the microbes are not there, the process of decomposition becomes very slow and the substances, though biodegradable, may remain on the surface of the land for a long time. Food chain, food web. Now that's a very important part of the chapter. When we are talking about what is the meaning of food chain and food web. What is food chain? The definition you should know. The feeding relationship between different organisms. The feeding relationship between different organisms, that is what is known as food chain. The feeding relationship between different organisms. I start with certain type of plants. Say suppose the grasses. Then these grasses fed upon by certain type of organisms, the grasshoppers. The grasshoppers fed on by frogs. The frogs fed on by snakes. The snakes picked up by the hawk or the eagle. Now, in a typical example, now here try understanding many aspects you'll have to remember from this example. What is this type of an example we are talking about? This is a food chain. What type of a relationship is shown here? This is a food chain. What is the meaning of a food chain? What is the definition of food chain? The definition of food chain is feeding relationship between different group of organisms. It's a feeding relationship between different group of organisms. So this is known as a food chain. In each of these, any type of an example that I pick up, what am I going to come across common is there always has to be a producer. A food chain majorly starts with a producer followed by the different levels of consumers, heterotrophs. So now when I talk about the consumer, the producer and the different, the primary, the secondary, the tertiary and the top consumer. So what am I talking about? What are these different levels of organisms known as? These different levels of organisms are known as the trophic levels. Get acquainted with all these words that are coming across, underline in your book also. Trophic levels. What are trophic levels? We should know. What are trophic levels? The different group of organisms that are there in a food chain. The different the group of organisms in a food chain. That is what is known as a trophic level. So in this food chain, how many trophic level you get to see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have written an example of a typical food chain. A typical food chain is generally known to have 5 trophic levels. A typical food chain with 5 trophic levels. Then in nature, is it always necessary that food chains will always have 5 trophic levels? No, sometimes 3 भी हो सकता है, sometimes 4 भी हो सकता है, 5 भी हो सकता है, but beyond 5 generally नहीं है. Now there's a reason why beyond 5 नहीं है. So what is the number of trophic levels in a food chain? The number of trophic levels in a food chain, majorly 3 to 5. 3 minimum, 5 maximum, 6 kabhi kamar along with decomposers and detritivores if you write. Other than that, no. Nahi hota. The energy that next level will not get. So when we are talking about the different group of organisms, every organism feeds on the previous. Now, if this is a food chain, is it always necessary that the grasshopper will only and only feed on one type of grasses? No, the grasshopper may feed on other type of leaves. Is it necessary that the frogs will only feed on the grasshoppers? No, the frogs may feed on other different type of caterpillars also, etc., etc. I talk about the snakes. Not necessary the snakes will only feed on the frogs. It may feed on other different type of organisms. So now, in nature, ideally speaking, is it there any clear, neat, specific one-line relationship, feeding relationship in the nature? Can we talk about this? No. Even for us, when we are talking about ourselves, we feed on different type of plants and different type of animal food. And say suppose one type of an organism, one type of a food not available in the market, we immediately switch on to the other type. Exactly same like that. Whenever I talk about that, these frogs come across that the number of grasshoppers in the habitat is lesser, they will immediately switch on to another type of food. The snakes come across that the frogs are now lesser, they will immediately switch on to another type of an animal. So that's why in nature, finding a typical food chain, a single food chain, always constant, no, it's not possible. Go Fran, sit straight. Sit straight. And if you are sleepy, you have to go and wash your face and come. So now, when we are talking about in nature, it is never possible that we talk about only a single food chain. So now, what did I say? That there are a number of food chains interacting with each other, a number of organisms interacting with each other. So that's the reason we come across, look into the next page there, 169. In nature, we always come across, there is always interacting food chains. And what are these interacting food chains known as food web? There is always a interconnecting food chains, a large number of food chains working together, because one organism is not only dependent on one specific type of organism. I may understand that these frogs may be dependent on the locusts also, it may be dependent on certain other millipede, centipede, caterpillars, and so many other type of organisms. So that is what we are talking about, that these different group of organisms, food chain is not a single line of relationship. There are multiple organisms on which one specific organism depends. So there we talk about an interlinking network of food chain. What is it known as? Food web. Now see there's a particular diagram there. There's a particular figure 170. Can you find out how many food chains are there? Page 170. Page 170 mein dekho. How many food chains are there? Look into the diagram. Look into that interlink. This type of questions you get in the figure in your exams. How many food chains are there? Find out. नहीं उससे भी ज़्यादा है. You may mark and keep. नहीं.
7 or 8.
देखो. Check properly. How many are there? 6. 7. Yes. How many food chains are there? You'll have to check very, very keenly. What are the different relationships? What are the different relationships? Check. 7. They'll give you even more complicated or simpler than that. So definitely you'll have to come across. Now see there, how do you check? The first is we talk about the rabbit and the hawk or the eagle there. And then from the mouse itself, see there is 1, there is 2 more food chains there. Then you talk about the bird there, the parrot syllables. Now this bird, from the bird again, we come across 2 food chains. So that way specifically you have to check 1, 2, 3, 4, number them and be very specific in writing down the numbers. So what are trophic levels I told you? Trophic levels are what I told you, the different group of organisms in a food chain. हाँ.
जैसे से ट्रॉफिक लेवल बढ़ता जाता है एनर्जी कम होती है.
Energy कम इसीलिए होता जा रहा है. When I talk about this has consumed energy from the sun, made the food. Now this is not making any energy, but it is only grabbing the energy from this. But whatever it is grabbing, it is utilizing also. So now ये जब इस पे depend हो रहा है, this is not getting the same amount of energy what this got from this one. We will talk about this. This is known as energy flow. So first of all, the trophic levels, to be very clear. Trophic levels means what? Different group of organisms in a food chain. Now look into the trophic level. The pyramid, what is that? This is a food pyramid also. When we are talking about the entire concept can be also written in the pyramid form. So when we write down the same concept in a pyramid, what are the major features we are supposed to understand from that pyramid? See there, the first one, if you check, the producers. The producers are more in number than the primary consumers, then the secondary consumer, then the tertiary consumer. Now, when we are talking about the pyramid, if I have to draw the same concept in a pyramid, then how will I show this? I will generally show that how many levels are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 1 and this is 2 and this is 3 and 4 and 5. So what do I write here? I am writing here plants or the grass. Then what do I write here? I write here the grasshoppers. Then what do I write here? I write here the frogs and the snakes and the hawk or the eagle. So what does this indicate? The number of organisms in this particular pyramid. What do you understand? Which group has the maximum number of individuals? The plants, autotrophs, producers. And which group has the least? The higher group of organisms will always be least. So, and as you move from here to here, what is happening? As we are moving from here to here, the energy is progressively decreasing. Look into that pyramid and get very well acquainted with the names. Producer to tertiary consumer. and the different examples. Now let's talk about the concept of energy flow. What is the meaning of energy flow? And what are you supposed to remember from these examples? I talk about energy flow with a very simple example. If I understand that these autotrophs, that is the grasses, they may be trapping, now they are constantly absorbing sunlight. What is the proportion of sunlight that they can absorb? They are absorbing only 1% of sunlight, incident sunlight, only 1% they absorb, and carry out which process? Photosynthesis. What type of organic food? Glucose. Glucose is the organic food that these organisms are preparing. Now, by absorbing, utilizing this much of the energy, they are storing some amount of energy in their tissues. For example, I may say that they are absorbing or storing a specific unit of energy. Just say, for an example, I'm talking about now 1,000 joules or 1,000 kilojoules of energy they are absorbing. This type of questions you get in the paper. See that you understand the relation and answer very correctly. Then what does the rule indicate? What does the rule explain? The rule explains that when these type of producers, whatever be the amount of energy that they have stored it, when the next group of organism feeds on this organism, how much of the energy will get transferred to the body of these organism? Only 1%. Only 1% of the energy the grasshoppers would get from the, 10%, not 1%, I'm sorry, 10%. So only 10% energy, that's known as the 10% rule. So the grasshoppers would get only 10% energy from the grasses. Because the grasses, they have stored whatever amount of energy, they will not be in a position to give all of it. They have already used so much in the process of transport, in the process of division, in the process of growth. So now that this organism is feeding on this, can they get the entire amount? Obviously not, because these organisms are still in the process of growth, division, repair, so much. So this organism can get at the most only 10% of the energy. So if I believe that way, so now what it is? It is something like this. When the frogs now feed on this, again, what is it? 10% rule. 10% rule. So progressively what is happening is the amount of energy getting decreased, that every trophic level gets, yes, how much? 10% rule. So now next what? When the hawk is feeding on the 100, only this much. So now after this, can I think of anything? You get questions like this. Why food chains do not have trophic levels more than 5? Because because the 5th trophic level itself is getting such a minimum amount of energy. So what will happen if there's a 6th or the 7th level? Hardly they get any amount of energy by the process of consumption of food. You get questions that why are the frogs getting only 10% energy? What will you write? What did I tell you just now? Because the grasshopper has already used 90% of the energy almost in the process of reproduction, in the process of cell division, in the process of repair, growth, metabolism. तो कितने सारे functions इसकी body के अंदर हुआ जहाँ पे energy requirement थी. Why the snakes getting only this much? Because the frogs have undergone so many different type of processes, and you'll have to use these words. Metabolism एक है, process of cell division, repair है, and reproduction है. हाँ बोलो. जब हम meat खाते हैं, हाँ, तो हमें भी कैसे 10% exactly. Along with the proteins and the minerals and the vitamins. So whenever we are feeding on any type of a food, that's the reason we have to eat so many varieties. नहीं तो एक type of variety खाके that would have been enough for us. Nutritional requirement and energy requirement एक से satisfy क्यों नहीं होता? Because we are getting small amount from every different type of food. Yes. And the moment I talk about this group of organisms, this is what you'll have to write. You get this as a give reason question majorly. Why? One trophic level, when it feeds on the previous, it receives only 10% energy, because the previous trophic level has utilized almost about 80 to 90% of energy in respiration, movement, locomotion, reproduction, transport, and repair cell division. ये 5 points लिखना ही है. We'll write one question and anything relevant, try to use a set of words to answer this question. There's a question in your NCRT also, and in the previous board also many such questions have come. Write down one question, give reason. Give reason. एक तो आता है जो very common है, energy flow is unidirectional. This is one question which is very common. Explain why. आया था, हाँ वो पेपर बोर्ड में भी आएगा. क्यों नहीं समझ में आया? तो क्वेश्चन में था ना, तो एक बार पढ़ के क्यों नहीं गए? Okay, right. Number 1, give reason. We will answer both these questions. Give reason. Number 1. Only 10% of energy, number 1, only 10% of energy, only 10% of energy passes from one trophic level to the next. Only 10% of energy passes from one trophic level to the next. In the exam, you will generally get one food chain in the paper. And then they will ask you, how much of the energy does the snake get from the frog? So you will write 10%. Then they will ask you why. Explain with a reason. So this type of question is typical. Now I am giving you in general. Give reason why. Give reason why. One trophic level receives only 10% energy from the previous trophic level. Only 10% energy from the previous trophic level. So you will. हाँ तो एक ही तो क्वेश्चन दिया मैंने, दो कहाँ दिया? अरे गुफरान सो रहा है. नहीं वो unidirectional का आंसर थोड़ा अलग है. Now you have to explain with the concept of these 5 factors that I told you. Let us write. When one trophic level feeds on the previous, लिखो. When one trophic level feeds on the previous, when one trophic level feeds on the previous, the amount of energy that it receives by the way of food, the amount of energy that it receives by the way of food is only 10%. Is only 10%. Full stop. This is because the previous trophic level has utilized 80 to 90% of the energy, 80 to 90% of the energy in movement and locomotion, comma, respiration, comma, transport of fluids and soluble food, comma, metabolism, comma, cell division growth and also reproduction. Cell division growth and also reproduction. क्या था? स्पाइडर बॉडी में आना लकी होता है. आने दे.
लेकिन ग्रास तो लोकोमोशन नहीं कर सकता.
हाँ, not a problem. That's why I have mentioned points like transportation of fluids and soluble food. So the energy for the grasshopper कहाँ पे जाएगा? Cell division growth, formation of the flower fruit उसमें जा रहा है, transport xylem phloem उसमें जा रहा है.
तो अगर ग्रासहॉपर पूछा तो ग्रास का वो फ्लोएम उसमें.
हाँ, अगर general है, so that's why I have given you all the 5-6 points. General, specific. In your paper, it will generally be specific. Okay. Now ये example लिखो. ये example लिखो. Under in that same answer. ये example लिखो. नहीं. The food chain. फटाफट. Food chain का example लिखो. Along with that answer. Food chain example लिखो. The same example that I have written. This one. Example लिखो.
के पास 100 जूल है
कैसे 0.1 किलो जूल हाँ किलो जूल सॉरी 0.1 हाँ 100 जूल हो गया एक ही बात है then क्या होगा okay after you write this then just one more sentence you'll have to add up there every tropic level receives नहीं यही आंसर इसमें ये भी ऐड करना है एक एग्जांपल देना है after the paragraph I told you add this example and then the last line every tropic level receives 10% energy hence food chains follow the 10% law hence food chains follow the 10% law of energy flow hence food chains follow the 10% law of energy flow अच्छा एक और क्वेश्चन है energy flow is unidirectional give reason the next question लिखो energy flow is unidirectional this is also very common a question energy flow is unidirectional what to write energy flow is unidirectional अब जब grasshoppers have fed on the grasses and energy had flown from the grass to the grasshopper possible है grasshopper से grass में वापस आएगा energy never so there is no reversion possible it does not revert back the energy flow is always unidirectional from the smaller group of organisms to the larger complex हाँ
अगर हॉक ग्रास हॉपर को
हॉक कभी खाएगा ही नहीं ग्रासहॉपर
स्कैवेंजर है भाई
हॉक के लिए वो इंसल्ट हो जाएगा ना वो ग्रासहॉपर क्यों खाए और every type of an organism has a preference for food now if I talk about the frog के सामने कॉकरोच रखा जाए वो कॉकरोच खाएगा हमारे सामने रखे तो खाएंगे that is not our preferred food हाँ हम चाइनीज नहीं है so now when we are talking about this write that question after that देखो book बंद भी कर 10th standard students तेरा क्या होगा I am so tensed about you पता नहीं how your parents are reacting कितने लोगों का parents का भी blood pressure बढ़ रहा है हाँ तेरा तो बढ़ना ही है so relax 10th standard का बच्चा कैसे ऐसे relaxed हो सकता है yours also क्यों not everyone's no नहीं चलो we'll do this question लिख के रखो energy flow is unidirectional we'll complete this after the break
मैथ्स लेक्चर है
क्या
मैथ्स लेक्चर है भाग जा देखिए पकड़ा जाएगा तो नहीं
मजा मीना भाई